I never thought choosing a checkout line could change my whole life. I just liked the girl behind the register. Her calm smile, her voice, the way she said, "Have a good night." But one evening she looked up and said something that stopped me cold. And from that moment, nothing in my life was the same again. Hello, you're watching True Lane, real stories with real twists. Let's get started. I'm Robert. I'm 30. Live alone in a small apartment on the north side of town. Nothing fancy, just a one-bedroom with thin walls and a view of the parking lot. I work for a local delivery company. We bring people furniture, TVs, random household stuff. It's not a dream job, but it pays the bills. And after a long day, I usually stop by the grocery store down the street to grab something simple for dinner. It was just another Tuesday night when I first saw her. I remember walking in tired, half awake, thinking about microwaving some pasta and calling it a night. And then I noticed a new cashier. She was scanning groceries with that calm, steady rhythm people get when they're good at their job. Blonde hair tied back, a soft voice, polite smile. Nothing over the top, just genuine. I didn't even realize I was watching her until someone behind me said, "Sir, are you in line?" From that night on, I started picking her checkout line every time. Even when hers was longer, I waited. I told myself it was coincidence, but it wasn't. I just wanted that short moment when she'd look up and say, "Hi, how are you?" The first few times it was just polite talk. "Busy day or do you need a bag?" But somehow those tiny moments stuck with me. She had this kindness in her tone that made everything else fade for a second. I caught myself planning grocery runs around her shift, pretending to need milk or bread just to end up at her register. A week passed, then another. She started recognizing me. The way she smiled changed. It wasn't the usual store smile anymore. It was warmer, almost teasing. One night, as she scanned my usual stuff, frozen dinners, a loaf of bread, a can of soup, she looked up, half grinning, and said, "You always choose my line." For a second, I froze. I laughed awkwardly, trying to sound casual. "Maybe you're just faster than the others," I said. She tilted her head, that small, amused look in her eyes. "Sure," she said softly. "Let's go with that." I walked out of the store that night with my groceries in one hand and my heart beating faster than it should have. I couldn't stop smiling. For the first time in a long while, I actually looked forward to the next day. Not because of work, not because of anything big, just because I knew at the end of it, I'd get to stand in her line again. The next few days, I kept telling myself I wasn't going to make a big deal out of it. She was just a cashier. I was just another customer. People talk, they smile. It doesn't have to mean anything. But every night after work, I found myself back in that store pretending I'd forgotten something from the day before. Sometimes it was milk, sometimes cereal. Once I bought batteries I didn't even need just to see her again. "Her name tag," said Maggie. Simple like her smile. She had this calm presence that made the noise of the store fade out. Whenever she spoke, it felt like she really meant what she said, even if it was just, "Have a good night." One evening I was standing a few miles away, pretending to read labels on a jar of pasta sauce, just waiting for her register to open. When it did, I went straight there. She looked up instantly, recognizing me, and said, "Back again." "Yeah," I said, setting down my few items. "You could say I'm a loyal customer." She laughed, scanning the items quickly. "You're making my job easier, at least." That laugh, it wasn't loud, but it lingered in my head long after I left. On the walk home, I kept replaying it. I hadn't felt that spark in years. I dated a few times, nothing serious, but this felt different, unplanned, honest. A few nights later, I decided to do something about it. I waited until there weren't many people behind me, heart racing, palms sweating like I was 16 again. She scanned the last item, handed me the receipt, and before I could overthink it, I said, "Hey, would you maybe like to grab a coffee sometime? You know, when you're not behind the counter?" For a second, she blinked, surprised. Then her lips curved into that same easy smile. "Sure," she said. "Just don't tell my manager you asked me while I was on the clock." I think I actually laughed out loud. "Deal," I said. We met the next evening at a small cafe a few blocks away from the store. It wasn't fancy, just a quiet corner place with a bell that rang every time someone walked in. She arrived wearing a gray hoodie and jeans, no makeup, hair loose around her face. She looked even better than I remembered. At first, it was small talk. She told me she'd moved here less than a year ago, renting a room with two other girls. Said she didn't have family nearby and worked long hours because she needed to save up. I told her about my delivery job, about how the GPS in our truck sometimes got it wrong and sent me to dead ends. She laughed at that, and it felt normal, easy, but somewhere in the middle of our conversation, something changed. We weren't talking like strangers anymore. She looked me in the eyes when I spoke, like she actually cared about the answers. I found myself opening up, telling her how I'd always lived in this city, but somehow never felt at home in it. She nodded, saying quietly, "Yeah, I get that." We stayed for almost 2 hours just talking. When it was time to go, I walked her to the bus stop. The streetlights flickered and there was that quiet hum of traffic in the distance. She hugged her arms against the chill and said, "Thanks for the coffee. It was nice. I wanted to say something clever, something that would keep her thinking about me. But all I managed was, yeah, it really was." Before she stepped onto the bus, she turned and smiled one more time. "See you at the store, loyal customer." That night, I couldn't stop smiling. It wasn't like some movie scene with fireworks or music playing in the background. It was just real two people, coffee, conversation, and something new quietly starting to grow. Over the next week, I kept visiting the store, not just to see her, but because it had become part of my routine. She started slipping me little jokes along with the receipts. Once she said, "You're here so often, we should get you a rewards card." Another time, when the store was almost empty, she asked, "You're not stocking my shift schedule, are you?" I laughed, pretending to deny it, but we both knew the truth. By the time the second Friday rolled around, we already had plans for dinner. Nothing fancy, just pizza after her shift. And as I waited outside the store that night, watching the automatic doors slide open and close, I realized how strange it was that something so ordinary could start to feel like the best part of my week. I wasn't looking for anything when I met her, but somehow I'd found something worth holding on to. It had been almost 3 weeks since our first coffee, and by now seeing Maggie had become the best part of my day. We didn't talk about where things were going or what we were to each other, but we texted every morning and met a few times a week after her shift. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, simple, but real. One Saturday, she asked if I wanted to meet at a park not far from her place. It was early afternoon and the air smelled like freshly cut grass. She sat on a wooden bench near the pond, wearing a light jacket and holding a cup of coffee. When she saw me, she smiled, but it wasn't her usual bright smile. It was small, careful. I noticed it right away. "Hey," I said, sitting beside her. "You okay?" She nodded, looking down at her hands. "Yeah, just tired, I guess." We sat there for a while, watching a few ducks move slowly across the water. She was quiet, too quiet. Something was on her mind. Finally, she took a deep breath and said softly, "There's something I need to tell you, Robert." Her voice trembled a little. I felt my stomach tighten, unsure what was coming. She looked straight ahead, her eyes fixed on the pond. "I'm 3 months pregnant." For a few seconds, I didn't react. The words didn't register right away. I blinked, trying to process what I just heard. "You're pregnant?" She nodded, still not looking at me. "Yeah, I didn't plan to tell you like this. I just didn't want to lie to you either." I felt the air leave my chest. I didn't know what to say. My mind started racing about who, about why, about what this meant for us. She kept talking, her voice steady but fragile. "It's not complicated, really. I was seeing someone before I moved here. When I found out I was pregnant, he said he wasn't ready for this. 2 days later, he blocked my number and disappeared. I moved here to start over, to work, to save some money before the baby comes. I wasn't planning to meet anyone, especially not someone like you." She finally turned to me. Her eyes were red but dramatic. She wasn't crying, and that somehow made it even harder to look at her. "I understand if you don't want to see me again," she said quietly. "You didn't sign up for this." There was a long silence. The only sound was the faint rustle of leaves. I could have walked away right then, said something polite, made it easy for both of us, but I didn't move. I just sat there feeling the weight of the moment. "Maggie," I finally said, my voice low, "I don't know what to say, but I'm not going anywhere." Okay. She looked at me like she wasn't sure she'd heard me right. You don't have to say that. I know I said, but I mean it. We didn't talk much after that. We just sat there. She rested her hands on her stomach, and I found myself watching that small movement, the way she was already protecting someone she hadn't even met yet. It hit me harder than I expected. When I walked her home, the air had cooled. She stopped at the gate to her apartment and looked at me, unsure what to do. I think she was waiting for me to say goodbye and walk away. Instead, I said, "Text me when you get inside." Okay. She nodded, a faint smile returning to her face. Okay. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind looping over everything she'd said. 1,000 thoughts ran through my head. How unfair it was, how hard her life must have been these past months, how I was supposed to feel about it all. But under all that confusion, there was something else. I didn't want to lose her. The next day, I walked into the grocery store like always. She was at her register, scanning items for an elderly couple. When she looked up and saw me, her expression froze for a second. She looked almost scared. I waited in line anyway. When it was finally my turn, I didn't say anything clever. I just smiled and said, "Hi." She hesitated, then said softly, "Hey." As she handed me the receipt, I looked at her and said, "I told you I'm not going anywhere." Something in her eyes shifted, maybe relief, maybe disbelief, but I could see the tension in her shoulders ease a little. That night, she texted me, "Thank you for not walking away." And I wrote back, "You don't have to thank me. I just like being where you are." And as simple as that message was, I meant every word. After that day in the park, everything between us changed. Not overnight, but slowly, like the world had shifted just a little. I started picking her up after her evening shifts whenever I could. Sometimes we'd go for a short drive. Sometimes we'd just sit in the car in silence, listening to the hum of the highway lights. She didn't have to say much. I could tell when she was tired, when her back hurt, when she just needed someone to be there. I'd never thought of myself as someone patient or particularly good with emotions. But with Maggie, it felt different. She didn't want pity, and I wasn't trying to give it. What she needed was simple, someone steady, someone who wouldn't disappear when things got complicated. And that was something I knew I could be. One evening, I waited for her outside the store. It was raining, the kind of thin, cold drizzle that soaked through your jacket no matter what. She came out carrying her backpack, hair damp, face pale from a long shift. Without a word, I held out my umbrella. She smiled faintly and stepped under it beside me. "Rough day?" I asked. "They all are lately," she said quietly. "But I'm okay." "You don't have to be okay all the time," I said. She glanced at me, surprised by how serious I sounded. "Most people don't know what to say when they find out I'm pregnant," she said. "They either act weirdly cheerful or disappear completely." "I'm not most people," I said. She smiled again, a real one this time. "Yeah," she said softly. "I'm starting to see that." After that, we became part of each other's lives without really planning it. I started cooking dinner at my place on her nights off. She'd sit at the counter, talking while I made pasta or grilled something simple. She said she liked watching me cook because it felt normal. Once I asked if she wanted me to go with her to her next doctor's appointment. She hesitated for a long moment before nodding. "If you really don't mind, I wouldn't have offered if I did," I said. The day of the appointment, she was nervous. I could see it in how she kept adjusting her sleeves and fidgeting with her phone in the waiting room. When the nurse called her name, I stood up to follow. Maggie looked back at me like she was making sure I meant it. I nodded and she smiled nervously before walking in. Inside, the doctor turned the monitor toward her. There it was, a tiny shape flickering on the screen. Maggie's eyes filled instantly. She grabbed my hand without even thinking. I squeezed it back, trying to keep my own emotions steady. I didn't know what to say, so I just whispered, "Hey, that's a strong heartbeat." She laughed through tears. "Yeah, I guess so." Afterward, we sat in the car for a while, neither of us speaking. Finally, she said, "You didn't have to come." I wanted to," I said simply, and that was the truth. I wanted to be there for her, for everything that came next. Weeks passed. The weather turned colder, and Maggie's belly started to show a little. She'd joke about it sometimes, but I could see how scared she still was beneath the surface. Late one night, she texted me, "I don't know why you're still here, but thank you." I replied, because I want to be. That winter, she finally let me meet her landlord so I could help fix a broken heater in her apartment. After that, I started staying over more often, not because she asked me to, but because she seemed calmer when I was there. We'd watch old movies on her laptop, her head resting lightly on my shoulder. She'd say things like, "You really think you're ready for all this?" And I'd answer, "No one's ever really ready for anything. We just show up." One night she turned to me and said, I never thought I'd meet someone like you in a grocery store." I laughed. I just wanted milk that day. She laughed too, covering her mouth with her hand. In that moment, simple, ordinary, felt like something I wanted to hold on to forever. By now, it wasn't about pity or doing the right thing. It was about love, the quiet kind that grows from showing up again and again. I started saving money, helping her set up a small nursery in her room. We painted the walls pale yellow because she said it felt like sunlight. We didn't talk about the future in big words. No proposals, no labels. But we both knew what we were building. It was fragile, imperfect, but real. Sometimes I'd catch her watching me when she thought I wasn't looking. There was gratitude in her eyes, but also something deeper, trust. And I realized then that love isn't always about passion or perfect timing. Sometimes it's just two people deciding not to give up, even when the rest of the world already has. By the time spring came, everything around us had changed. Maggie had stopped working at the grocery store a month before her due date. The manager was kind enough to let her go early, and I helped her carry the last of her things home in the back of my old pickup. I still remember her standing by the door of the store one last time, looking at the checkout lanes where we first met. She smiled faintly and said, "Crazy how a simple line changed at everything." Life slowed down after that. I started coming over every evening after work, cooking dinner, helping her around the apartment. We'd built a quiet rhythm. Morning texts, doctor appointments, small walks in the park, late night talks when she couldn't sleep because the baby was kicking. There were moments of doubt. Sometimes she'd say, "You don't have to do all this, Robert. You didn't sign up for this kind of life." And every time I'd answer the same way, "I'm already in it. I'm not going anywhere." She stopped arguing after a while. I think she finally believed me. When the day came, it was early morning. She called me just after 6, her voice trembling. "It's time," she said. I'd never driven so fast in my life. By the time I reached the hospital, she was already in a wheelchair, pale but calm. She squeezed my hand when she saw me. The hours that followed were long and blurry. Nurses moving in and out, monitors beeping, the quiet tension of waiting. I sat by her side through all of it. She was stronger than I'd ever seen anyone be. When the baby's cry finally filled the room, I felt my throat tighten. A nurse handed me the tiny bundle, and I just stood there staring. It didn't matter that it wasn't my child by blood. In that moment, it didn't feel like it mattered at all. Maggie looked exhausted but peaceful. "You really stayed," she whispered, her voice weak but sure. "Yeah," I said, smiling through tears. "I chose your line, and I'm never switching." She laughed quietly, even as her eyes watered. We named the baby Liam. I was the one who filled out the form at the nurse's desk while Maggie rested. When they asked about father's name, I hesitated for a second. Then I wrote mine not because it was official, but because it felt right. Those first few weeks were a blur of sleepless nights, bottles, and constant worry. Maggie moved in with me, and the small apartment suddenly felt alive. There were bottles drying near the sink, soft music playing late at night, and the sound of a baby's tiny breaths in the next room. One night, as we were sitting on the couch, Maggie leaned her head on my shoulder and said, "Do you ever think about how random it was? You, me, that store all the time?" I said, "I still can't believe I almost didn't go in that night." She smiled. "I can't believe you kept coming back." "Well," I said, grinning, "you had the best line in the store." We both laughed quietly, not needing to say more. Over time, things found their place. I didn't try to replace anyone. I just became part of their small world. Liam started to smile, then laugh, and it did something to me I can't even describe. Every time I saw Maggie holding him, something inside me felt complete. Not perfect, not like in the movies, but real. A few months later, on a warm evening in June, we went back to that same grocery store. It felt strange walking in together, hand in hand, pushing a stroller down the same aisles where it all started. Some of the cashiers recognized her and came over to say hello. One of them asked jokingly, "So Maggie, did you ever find someone who always chooses your line?" She looked at me and smiled. "Yeah," she said softly, and he never stopped. We all laughed, but inside I felt something tightened in my chest, a mix of pride, peace, and disbelief at how life had turned out. Later that night, as we sat on the balcony, the city lights flickering in the distance, Maggie said, I don't think I've ever really thanked you for staying for everything." I looked at her tired but happy and said, "You don't have to thank me. You and Liam, you're home." She didn't answer, just took my hand and squeezed it gently. And that's how our story settled, not in fireworks or some grand ending, but in small moments of quiet certainty. A grocery store line, a simple smile, a woman trying to hold her life together, and a man who decided to stand beside her. People say love finds you when you least expect it. Maybe that's true. Love doesn't always arrive with perfect timing or an empty slate. Sometimes it shows up in the middle of someone else's storm, asking only if you're willing to stay. Robert's story aches with that quiet bravery, a lonely delivery guy drawn to Maggie's gentle, "Have a good night," returning night after night until her teasing, "You always choose my line," cracked his world open. When she revealed her pregnancy, alone, abandoned, terrified, most would have fled. Instead, he whispered, "I'm not going anywhere," and meant it with every doctor visit, every 3 a.m. bottle, every pale yellow nursery wall. This isn't the fairy tale of flawless beginnings. It's the raw, tear-streaked truth that real love is a choice renewed daily when the path gets harder than anyone warned. It's showing up with an umbrella in the rain, holding a hand through contractions, signing your name on a birth certificate that biology never asked for. The lesson burns behind the eyes. Courage isn't grand gestures. It's the steady heartbeat beside someone else's fear, proving that family isn't only blood. It's the people who refuse to let you face the dark alone. What's your moment of choosing to stay when walking away would have been easier? Spill it in the comments. Your honesty keeps this channel alive. And if Robert and Maggie's unbreakable quiet love wrecked you in the best way, smash subscribe and ring the bell. Trelene drops real stories with soul-shaking twists every week, because your next life-changing choice might be one checkout line away.